So I'd like to introduce Sandra Spence, who's the executive director of CAMFED here in Canada. Her presentation is entitled Rooting Seeds of Climate Change Activism in Rural Schools and Communities in Africa. Prior to returning to Canada in 2022 to become CAMFED Canada's executive director, Sandra served at CAMFED USA for 11 years in roles as co-director and director of global partnerships, working closely with CAMFED consortium teams across 5 countries in Africa. She gained practical experience implementing CAMFED's model, which honors solutions for girls' education and young women's empowerment, rooted in and led by local and national partners, especially young women. Prior to joining CAMFED, Sandra was a research consultant focusing on global health, following a career in product management spanning medical technology and scientific instruments. She holds a master's in public health from the University of California at Berkeley and a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Toronto. So thank you so much, Sandra, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Wanda. I really appreciate it. And it's so difficult following Christina, but I'll do my best. And I'll share my screen with my slides. Great. So Wanda has already described what the title of my presentation, so I don't need to do that again. But I really wanted to thank Wanda for this opportunity, because climate change education is such a huge topic, and Wanda and 60 Million Girls are giving us such a valuable opportunity today to zero in on that intersection in particular of climate activism and girls' education. And since CAMFED works predominantly with girls and young women in Africa and rural communities there, where climate change is impacting their lives on a daily basis. So we've really had the benefit of being inspired by our clients, these girls and young women, and learning from them to look to really dig into the intersection of these two topics, activism and girls' education. So today, what I'd like to do, I can change my slides. I'll be talking about CAMFED's approach to rooting climate activism and girls' education. And I'll first be talking about the delivery aspect, how our approach to delivering this education, which is through interweaving it with 2 existing programs, the Learner Guides, who are primarily based, Learner Guide program, which is primarily based at schools, and then CAMFED's Agriculture Guide program, which is based centered in communities, but they also work at schools as well. And then secondly, I'll be talking a little bit about how we co-created a curriculum about climate activism with girls and young women. And in particular, how we're seeking to balance it's important balance between girls and boys understanding what they can do to contribute to climate resiliencies in their own lives and in their communities, but balancing that with the sense of climate justice and what it requires for all of us globally, without putting all the onus for all the solutions on the shoulders of these young people. And I should mention our work in schools is based primarily at the secondary school level. So first of all, in terms of program delivery, I mentioned Learner Guides. Who are Learner Guides? Well, Learner Guides are young women who have recently completed secondary school themselves, and they're trained, and then they volunteer several hours a week to work back in their local secondary schools. And at the schools, they facilitate life skills sessions for classes of girls and boys, using a curriculum, the My Better World curriculum that I'll describe shortly. And because of their present at the schools, they're also serving, in addition to facilitating those classes, they're also serving as role models, what educated young women can do. And they're also serving, they're available to be one-to-one mentors, particularly to girls who are at risk of dropout, because these women have, the Learner Guides to date have been supported by CAMFED, so they've come from very marginalized backgrounds themselves, and they can share that experience and how they've overcome it with girls at their schools. So In terms of the impact of that program, to date, it's been around for a little over 10 years, and we've trained over 22,000 learner guides across 5 countries, and they in turn have reached over 2 million students at more than 4,000 schools in the countries in which we work. And the program with which they work is associated with improved retention, progression, and learning outcomes, especially for marginalized girls. And students, girls and boys, report increased confidence and enjoyment of school and academic self-esteem after participating in the My Better World sessions with learner guides. And finally, an important thing I want to flag in terms of sort of transformation, systems transformation, is that in the countries in which we work, we are exploring with governments how they might be able to adapt a program like the Learner Guide program to reach out and provide more opportunities for marginalized girls and young women. So that's one aspect of one side of the delivery. The other program that we are using to help us deliver the climate change education program are the agriculture guides. And similar to the Learner Guide program, the idea for the agriculture guide program actually came out of the young women who we've supported through school. And when they finished their schools and like living in largely agricultural communities, they had a very strong desire to give back to their communities and share some further education that they received. So, like the learner guides, they're young women who volunteer. In this case, mostly they volunteer to support community members, and mostly with an emphasis on targeting smallholder women farmers, the kinds of farmers who aren't always reached by government agriculture extension workers. So reaching those kind of women. And they also have roles at schools because some of them also work with parent support groups at their local schools to help them grow crops and increase their yields for improved school meal programs. So they have that experience of being at schools. And their impact, we've had some studies to date to show that their teaching has helped clients improve their farm yields and increase household nutrition and even incomes for their households. So we've got those two programs that will serve, we knew would be very strong, upon which we could layer in our climate education program. And we and what very importantly you can see, especially in relation to girls' education, is that both those programs, the agriculture guides and the learner guides, are both young women led, and so they're educated young women, and that's a really important. They're spearheading this education program, and by virtue of them being young women leaders in their communities. So the second element of our program, very necessary, is creating the curriculum. And our goal was, we had already, as I mentioned, the My Better World life skills curriculum. And our goal was to not create something entirely separate, but to create additional climate education modules that we could weave into that life skills program. Because that program, the life skills program, already had a really interactive, interesting pedagogy. It uses social and emotional learning to help children and students focus first on their personal well-being and get to know each other, get to know their strengths and their powers. And then as the students move through the program, which is usually taught over about a year and a half, they come to be challenged and think about how they can use their personal powers to do well for others in addition to themselves. And even to then, by the time they near the end of the program, thinking about what a better world might look like, what new systems might look like, and how they might be able to influence that. So we knew this curriculum was perfectly suited to add in additional material about climate activism. And to do that, the process of developing the climate education curriculum was a long one, comprehensive, and it involved many partners. And our initial focus was on developing it for Zimbabwe and Zambia. So the process began with, logically, with a needs assessment and a gap analysis. So looking at what already existed in the school curricula in those countries, in Zimbabwe and Zambia, perhaps in their science classes or geography classes, what existed already and what was missing. We went on to then hone in on, like, what what are the learning objectives we wish to achieve with this program? And they, what emerged was looking at climate justice, looking at building climate resilience, and how young people could become climate smart in their own lives, becoming aware, and potentially thinking after school about um, entering into pursuing green jobs after secondary school, and how young people can become climate champions in their communities. And then we, based on that, we could develop some resources. And the learning resources that we developed were aimed not at creating textbooks and even learning materials that the students themselves might use, but to support the learning materials that would support the learner guides and the agriculture guides working in school and the trainers who train those people. And of course, we did some training and testing, and we've gone on to, to date, we've received approval from the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education in Zimbabwe to use this curriculum in our partner schools, and we're awaiting approval from the Ministry of Education in Zambia. But the who that was engaged in this process was also very important, because as you can imagine, we needed experts, and among those experts we wanted education experts, experts in the curriculum development, and also experts, and we certainly brought in people from ministries of education in the countries. We brought in educational consultants such as Christina. She really helped us out on developing this curriculum as well. But we made sure among the experts we brought in on the education and curriculum development side were the learner guides, and as well as teachers and students. And the learner guides were essential because they've had a lot of experience working in schools at the secondary level. They know the sort of the words, the phrases, what engages young people, especially girls at those schools, and what kind of activities. So they were crucial. And then, of course, we also brought in subject matter experts, and those included experts from the Ministry of Agriculture. So we had created MOUs with the Ministry of Agriculture, and experts from universities and institutes in Zimbabwe and Zambia, and of course the agriculture guides themselves, because they knew what worked in their local communities, what the problems were, what the challenges were, and therefore what would be of value for young people in those local communities. So, key to this is, addressing girls' education, was including young women in all areas and all steps of that process. And another really important goal of the process was to ensure that we created resources that were going to be sustainable and wide reaching. So we didn't we had pretty wide reach in those countries, but we didn't just want to get approval for the use of these resources in our own CAMFED partner schools, which are government schools, but we ideally wanted to provide resources or create resources that the ministries of education might be comfortable using beyond our partner schools and adapt for their own use. So that was one of the key aspects, and why we included them very closely in the development of the curriculum, including people who knew what was required to get curricula approved for use in government schools. So that was important part of our process. And now is I want to talk a little bit about a few important sort of key lenses for curriculum development which emerged through this process. And I must say, Christina has written very eloquently about some of these. So some of these words I'm stealing directly from some words that she's written. So one key lens is the importance, as you can imagine, of localizing and contextualizing the content when we're working with young people. So using those as entry points. So rather than starting with very abstract climate concepts, or talking about climate events that happen far away, these young people, they've experienced climate change in their own communities up front. So using their stories to give them examples, and these are examples of a class activity where they're talking about what would you do in this situation if, for instance, they come across a flooded river, or another example of discussing a scenario of a day in the life of a young child of Cheeto, a young girl who's got to, one of her daily chores is to gather water, and how she has to walk so much farther to gather water because of droughts, and how that impacts her school day. So really incorporating things that are meaningful and will show that we're really looking at the lives of the students with whom we're working. Another important a key lens that we wanted to incorporate in the curriculum and in the activities was, as I said at the outset, balancing the sense of, yes, we want to create among the children a sense that, yes, they do have individual agency. They can become climate smart and become champions in their own communities, and that's really important, but also ensure that there was discussion going on in through these modules and in their classes, to show them that, again, this doesn't rest all on their shoulders. That, as Christina was saying earlier, like systems change, it's crucial that governments in their country be involved, and even beyond their local and national governments, that worldwide, that the global community bear responsibility for climate mitigation and resilience, adaptation, and especially for the immense resources required for these. So those were all part of the discussions that will be that the children will be having, led by their facilitators. And finally, we wanted to pull through, very importantly, because of our focus on girls' education, ensure that we're showing that the content is gender empowering and inclusive. So we've got a lot of stories. It's packed full of stories about climate champions who are women, and show how they can use their knowledge and become leaders in their communities around these areas. And we also talk about how the necessity of girls and women needing to be engaged in decisions and discussions and problem solving in their communities around climate change. And that's all sort of wrapped up as part of inclusion and looking at the big picture, that we also want to make sure, in addition to women and girls, that we're considering about local traditions, local ways of doing things, local ways of knowing, but also, understanding that local traditional authorities are very important in making decisions in these communities. So including the best of the local traditions and combining them with what we know, new things that we know about climate change education. So that's where we stand right now. So we have the curriculum, we have our delivery, and I should mention that the way, practically speaking, the way the delivery is planned is that the agriculture guides will do a lot of the work, incorporating the modules about climate change and some of the social and emotional learning and climate powers and resilience that the students can adopt. They'll take the lead on that, but then they'll bring in agriculture guides into the schools to talk about the practical aspects of climate smart agriculture and techniques, and even do some demonstrations in school gardens or at local demonstration farms as well. So they're really going to work together. So those two things, this curriculum and the young women leading on delivering this curriculum, are things that we feel are really going to work. And this is just starting up. This is the beginning of the school year in Zimbabwe and Zambia. So the learner guides are in schools, just introducing the basics of the My Better World life skills curriculum. So we like to think that they're preparing the soil to plant these new seeds of climate activism and inspiring girls with their activism at schools. And one asked me to mention, to date, most of the funding for this program, the program developments have come primarily, especially around climate education, from private foundations in the US and Canada. We'd like to see more funding come in, and I'm glad we're going to be talking about that in a few minutes. But we also, as I mentioned, we're keen on thinking about government integration and potential government adaptation, so to bring forward for a wider reach and to take this forward. So that's the main things that I wanted to cover about what it looks like from an implementation side. So thanks very much.